Hey everybody, welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. Thanks for tuning in. In just a second, you're going to hear my interview with Farrar, who's one of the local leaders in the retail cannabis industry. We're going to talk everything related to the cannabis industry, his licenses, what he's doing in Isla Vista, Santa Ynez, the future of the industry. It's a really compelling, interesting interview. So we'll get to that in a moment. If this is the first time that you're tuning in, thanks a lot for checking out the podcast. My podcasts are available on all podcast platforms. So we're talking Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud, Google, pretty much everywhere you find podcasts, and the video versions are available on YouTube. You can also find my podcast on my website, santabarbaratalks.com, and check it out. You can get all the previous ones, and you can learn about Patreon opportunities for exclusive content there. I'm also really excited because my podcasts are now available at newshawk.com. They're all streaming there now. And so you can watch shorter versions of the podcast there. And I'm really excited about that. This is a really cool partnership. After you watch the beginning of the podcast or excerpts, please watch the full thing on my podcast platform. So I really appreciate it. This is a really cool time and opportunity for both Newshawk and Santa Barbara Talks. But let's dive right in. We are really going to have an interesting conversation with Farrar. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's founded companies, software.com, Sonos. He's done a lot of stuff, and he's going to talk about the entire cannabis industry and everything that's going on with his licenses. So let's dive right in. And thanks for watching. Take care. Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. It's my pleasure today to be here with Farrar, who is he's a lot of things, but he's a serial entrepreneur. He's one of the co-founders of Sonos. And, he's largely regarded as one of the champions, one of the kings, the golden boy of the local cannabis industry. And we're going to have a great conversation with him today. Farrar, thanks for taking the time. How are you doing today?
I'm awesome, Josh. Thanks a lot for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it so much. I want to just sort of dive right in and sort of talk to you about what's going on with sort of the latest news with your company. You made some headlines recently talking about this. Well, I'll let you explain it, but as I understand it, sort of this, you went public with your company. So can you talk about what that means in terms of the local cannabis operations that you have? Maybe you can clarify sort of the curiosity people have. What does this really mean? Farrar goes public. So talk to me a little bit about it.
Yeah, sure. So what we announced that we're going to go public. It will happen in June. It takes a little while for these transactions to finish. You got regulatory approvals, lots of government agencies and things like that have to approve everything. So kind of, I've been lucky here in Santa Barbara to actually have been involved in 2 prior IPOs. I was one of the early guys at software.com, for those who remember that, which went public back in the .com day. And then I was one of the, as you mentioned, the early guys at Sonos, which went public about 2 years ago. So, really very exciting, and, exciting for Santa Barbara, cause for celebration for the company, cause for celebration for the employees. So we're going to do that again for the 3rd time with Glasshouse. We are going public on the Canadian exchange because of the federal rules on cannabis, and some weird irony. Canadian companies can be listed on U.S. exchanges, but U.S. companies have to be listed on Canadian exchanges. So we will be going public in Canada. That doesn't mean that anything about us is Canadian. No more than when Sonos, Santa Barbara founded and headquartered company, went public on the New York Stock Exchange. It did not become a New York company. We're not becoming a Canadian company. Just our stock will be traded in Canada. We'll have no employees that are outside of California. There's no changes to the management. So, love me or hate me, I'm still the guy. Slap or kiss the cheek, whichever fits. The reason that we're doing it is to raise capital for growth. We have a strategy of wanting to create the biggest cannabis brands in California, and we think that what the rest of the country wants is brands from California. That appellation really matters. Kind of like champagne comes from France and tequila comes from Mexico, cannabis comes from California, and we're on a strategy to execute on that. So going public allows us two things. One is it raises capital, which we will then use to fund expansion on retail and build brands and additional supply chain and cultivation. And the other is it gives you a public company currency so that you can acquire other companies using stock as well as cash. So from the idea of taking, good brands and plugging them that exist and plugging them into our platform, it gives us a whole bunch of tools that we don't have as a private company.
Okay, so can you sort of maybe talk a little bit about the business side of that? Because there's this perception of, oh my goodness, Graham Farrar's company went public, so he's done, he's sold out, he's off in Hawaii, he's he's not going to be involved. What does this actually mean on the ground as a practical matter for all the various things that you're doing? Are you still going to be a Santa Barbara person, a California guy with your hands involved here?
Yeah, I mean, I have some of the reporting is reported as an acquisition, which it's not. So it is no, there's no selling out. There's no don't get to go to Hawaii and quit working. It actually just means more work. Really what it does is it allows us to expand, and expansion typically means more time, not less. There's literally zero changes to the management or our operations. I remain the president, remain on the board of directors. We still control the board. We still have a majority shareholder vote. No employment changes at all happen as part of this transaction. It is just Glasshouse, better funded, better set up for expansion. So locally, it's not really going to mean much. Our cultivation operations don't change here. We have a couple new dispensary licenses that we can talk about, but not directly related to the transaction. So locally, it doesn't mean much. For Glasshouse, what it means is that you're going to see pharmacies in all other parts of California, and you're going to see expansion of manufacturing in places outside of Santa Barbara and expansions of cultivation outside of Santa Barbara. So really, we're setting ourselves up to build brands that can be dominant, cannabis brands that can be dominant in California, and then be poised that when the walls come down, which they look increasingly like they will sooner rather than later, we'll be able to take those, our brands national, right? So you probably don't have a favorite non-Mexican tequila, and many people don't have a favorite non-Californian cannabis brand. So we get a chance to know what people want. It's actually kind of funny. We have a free large focus group. It's called the Illicit Market, and it tells you what people want before they can have it. And what it tells us they want is California cannabis across the country, right? So if you go to New York and you find at this point illegal only stores there, so they're not following any of the rules, right? Like Florida has legal cannabis, it's closer to New York. Colorado has legal cannabis, it's been recreational longer than California. But those illegal bodegas don't stock their shelves with Florida or Colorado. They stock themselves with California because that's what the consumer wants. So first you win California, biggest cannabis market in the world, twice as big as the second largest, which is Colorado, almost as big as the next three combined. So best single market to be in, but soon we think that market becomes the basis of a national market or across the rest of the country. So that's what we're saying.
I'm blown away by the popularity of cannabis. I know that, I don't know why, from the time you're a child growing up, you always know people, they're like, they smoke marijuana, they smoke pot, they smoke cannabis. It was a quiet thing, it was not a big deal. But obviously we have these perceptions about what it is, what it means, what it does. But we've seen sort of almost a revolution in that, it is illegal federally, but locally or, California and in these states, we've seen this like billion-dollar industry erupt. Can you talk about, let's just zero in on the pharmacy on Mission Street. Okay. So that was your first license here in Santa Barbara. Why is that place so popular? What is it about Graham's cannabis that makes people wait for a long time, snaking lines outside of the building? Can you talk to me about the popularity of it?
Yeah, well, and firstly, right, it's like the world's a better place with cannabis in it, and so the more access that people can get to it, the more they enjoy it, right? Like I think it's worth remembering that California's got a 26-year medically legal history with cannabis, right? So it has been here for a long time. Frankly, if you get down to it, California has a longer history with cannabis than it does with wine, right? So people have been buying cannabis since the price was going to jail. So that's how much they want and enjoy it in their lives. Now that price has gone down, hence the explosion and more and more people finding beneficial ways to interact with it, right? Like, I think it's I always sometimes say that people who think they don't like cannabis just don't know how they like it yet. Sometimes that means that they've had an edible that wasn't labeled and they ate too much. Sometimes that means that they've smoked the wrong strain for them. Sometimes it means that they don't enjoy the psychoactive side, but a muscle bomb that relieves their arthritis is great, or a bath bomb that, these things do not get you high at all, right? Or maybe it's a tincture to help you sleep, right? There's so many different ways. And one of the things that regulated cannabis has done is gotten us out of the 2 buds in a Ziploc approach, right? That's not all cannabis is now. At the pharmacy, we've got 150 different brands and 10 different categories: edibles and beverages and topicals and tinctures and flower and pre-rolls and joints, et cetera, right? With 600 different SKUs, 600 different products in there, right? Like, it's so far evolved and has so far to go still. But if you think about it, there's something that cannabis can do to benefit just about everybody in some way. Most of them, or many of them, have nothing to do with actually getting high, right? So that's the explosion. Then, cannabis has been illegal for less than 1% of the time that we've had relationships with it as a species. The natural state of a plant is not to be illegal. Like, that is, I think we need to remind ourselves that we're identical with nature, not on top of it, but part of it. It's not something that needs to be fixed. Cannabis is a plant, despite all the stigma and things that go along with it. It's roots and leaves and water and sunshine, just like any other plant. So it just happens to be one that works really well with our body. Our body has what's called an endocannabinoid system in it. It's for homeostasis, which is a fancy word for balance. And our body makes endogenous cannabinoids. Cannabis makes phytocannabinoids. It means cannabinoids from plants: THC, CBD, CBN, all those are examples. So it has a bunch of keys to locks in our body, many of which we know work. We don't necessarily know how it works. Again, federal bans and Schedule I drugs don't get to be researched, so you don't get to learn about them. Hopefully something that will end. But at the end of the day, there's lots of ways this plant can help our bodies to good ends. And, I sometimes remind people, just because it feels good doesn't mean it's not medicine, right? So we should keep that in mind. So the pharmacy, back to your question, sorry for my long soliloquy there, but the pharmacy was the first ever adult use dispensary in Santa Barbara. As a local boy who grew up here, it felt pretty good to get to put our names down in the history books for doing that. We won. It was a highly competitive process. It took us 4 years to get there. We were the first dispensary that opened. Will be 2 years in August, so coming up on that pretty soon. And it's been amazingly positive. There's been no friction, no static. The business neighbors like us. There's more traffic. Taffy's is selling more pizza. Daily Grind is selling more coffees. We literally have people, thank us for being there, because, well, for some it's enjoyable. I'm in that camp. I enjoy cannabis. Sometimes I use it to help me sleep, or a muscle rub, but I also just like smoking a joint because it's a feel good, healthier, alternative to alcohol. But a lot of people really use it as medicine. I still remember a story. I went to a restaurant right after we'd opened the pharmacy, and the lady behind the counter bought my lunch to thank me for opening the dispensary, because she used to have to drive to Port Hueneme once a week to get her medicine, and now she didn't, right? So that's the kind of positivity that we get from it. The market keeps growing, many new customers every week. COVID actually was a wind at our back, I guess, because it brought a lot of new consumers into the market. I used to call them, we've always had like the fun on Friday night consumer, but with COVID, we picked up the tincture on Tuesday consumer, right? So this is the kids came home for spring break a year ago and never left, or you've been watching the case count ticker and you can't sleep. So there's a whole new class of people that found out how cannabis can be beneficial. 420 that just happened, the unofficial, or actually maybe it's getting more official. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, tweeted out on 420 that it was a national holiday now. So that's always kind of been the cannabis thing, but we had record sales across all 4 of our stores. So, again, it shows that the market just keeps growing. And I think the pharmacy is our own microcosm of that.
Yeah. So now you're expanding in Santa Barbara County. You have licenses for San Ynez and Isla Vista. So can you talk to me about what that's going to look like? What is the timeline for that? And why did you target those markets?
Sure. So just for people's background, the pharmacy on Mission and De La Vina and the other dispensaries are the city of Santa Barbara. The new locations were the county of Santa Barbara. The county, saw what happened to the city. They saw the tax revenue, the jobs. They saw that there was no negative impacts and decided that, they wanted to do the same thing. So they opened up a program. Again, it's merit-based. So all the applicants were scored, and the top ranked applicant from each community plan area, they call it, or CPA, was awarded the license. Only be one in each area. So they're taking a very, methodical, kind of go slow approach, which I think is fine and smart. And we went for two locations. One is pretty different from each other, in terms of the demographic and how we'll approach them. But I think both great fits for the pharmacy brand. One was Isla Vista, and the other was San Ynez. Isla Vista will be is on Pardal Street. It's a really awesome location. Set back from the street, lots of bike parking off the sidewalk. It's centrally located. One of the things that we like, there's kind of a couple of things we like central locations, but not in your face. Again, recognizing that not everybody's, the future's here, but it's not necessarily evenly distributed on cannabis. So no reason to poke people who aren't there yet. But still want it to be central for people to make it easy to access. One of the things I like about Santa Barbara is that we didn't do what some places do, where you stick the dispensaries over by like the strip clubs and the dump and stuff like that. It kind of perpetuates the stigma of like seediness, right? The pharmacy on the corner of Mission and De La Vina is a boutique, right? We could trade places with Bryant and Sons Jewelers, and you wouldn't have to change it, right? So it's a very stigma busting store. We get the average age of our consumers about 42, right? So we're not this is not stoner culture. This is Santa Barbara culture. So again, back to it. So we like, places that are central, but not in your face. We like standalone buildings so that we're not, impacting others. We didn't want to displace existing businesses. So we were able to achieve those things in both of our locations. So we're on Pardal, set back from the street, tons of bike parking, small footprint, because we think IV consumers are going to kind of know what they want. They're an educated consumer. They'll do a lot of the ordering ahead of time on their phone. Then we'll do delivery, or they'll just can walk up and pick up a prepackaged order. Kind of think about the way that a lot of food works these days. Place the order and pick it up. We'll be able to do that from IV. And San Ynez, again, very different. This was actually is in this old Star Drug location. So it literally went from pharmacy with a PH to pharmacy with an F, which is kind of cool. And it fits in with our plants over pills and farms over pharma vibe and the healing nature of cannabis. Again, standalone business. The pharmacy had already closed down. The owner and landlord of the pharmacy PH is actually now on our advisory board of the pharmacy with an F. It's right central downtown, but not on the main street. Standalone buildings. So lot off-street parking, much bigger. And so up there, I think it's going to be a lot more of an educational vibe, where we'll do a lot more consultative selling of people understanding and having first-time interactions. So we're super stoked about both locations. Again, totally local operations. My general manager, Leah, and I have been best friends since we were 14. She went to Santa Barbara High. I've been Foothill Elementary, Santa Barbara High, et cetera. So all these areas are places that we literally grew up as our home stomping grounds, and we're super excited to bring the pharmacy to both.
Mm-hmm. It feels like, from a just sort of an observer's perspective, that so much of what you do is fairly seamless, or it seems like you sort of have this golden touch, like Graham Farrar gets what he wants. Has there been pushback? I mean, are there people who are? We know the cannabis industry can get a little bit, on the business side, a little bit fierce, a little ferocious, very competitive. We're talking high stakes, lots of money to be made for these sites. Have you felt any sort of pressure from other companies, industries? How are you dealing with any sort of, litigation or threats or anger? I mean, or is everything you're doing just working out great right now?
I mean, there's no golden touch, right? The golden touch is a lot of hard, not unrelenting work. I mean, case in point, here you and I are talking on a Sunday, right? Because that's the only time in the schedule that it fits. So there's nothing easy. I mean, there's nothing easy about building things in general, but the adage of twice the cost and twice as long, is 4 times the cost and 4 times as long in cannabis, right? Like cannabis is like trying to ride your bike with the brakes stuck on. You pedal hard enough and you keep going, but it's not easy by any sense. We haven't really seen pushback on the business side. You know, there was a lawsuit related to some of the other dispensaries, but you know, it was like we had nothing to do with it. So I've witnessed a little bit. Most of what we deal with is actually community, right? So if you think about Prop 64, it was a political landslide, right? Like 72 or 3%, I think, in Santa Barbara. And this was 2018, right? So fast forward 3 years, it'd probably be 90%, right? But nevertheless, that means, again, you know, that the line is that the future's here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. So I think most Americans, most people know that the lies of old of cannabis, Schedule 1, no known medical benefit, high potential for abuse. Like, show me a stat on that, right? I mean, cannabis is looking more like an off-ramp for addiction than a gateway drug at this point, right? Epidiolex, FDA certified medication derived from cannabis, yet cannabis still sits in the no known medical benefit category. I mean, we're talking like fentanyl, heroin, cocaine. These are Schedule 2 drugs. These are drugs that are supposedly less dangerous than cannabis at Schedule 1, right? So look at harm, think about alcohol, tobacco, all these things, right? And these things are legal, and cannabis is the worst of the worst of the worst. Obviously not true. People are learning that. Not everybody has learned it yet, though, right? So going back to, let's say Prop 64, when it passed at 72%, that still means that if there's 10 people in the room, statistically speaking, 3 of them voted against it. 3 of them thought that you shouldn't have the right to take a plant and put it in your body if you wanted to. So we deal with that. Not really anything at retail. That's just pure positivity. But on the cultivation side, there's, you know, a handful of folks that they're a very loud, small minority, but noisy in terms of not liking cannabis. That doesn't mean that we don't care and that we don't do everything that we can to make them happy too, because we all live in a community and we don't want to do things that are negative for anybody. But at the end of the day, the pushback's not from the industry. It's from that loud minority of folks who think cannabis is bad and don't like basically anything associated with it. So we do quite a bit of work, odor mitigation, et cetera. We have the strongest odor standards in the state here in Santa Barbara County for cannabis. Spend lots of time, lots of money on making sure that our impact on those folks is as small as possible.
Yeah. You know, that when you talk about cannabis, and you're like the wrong example for me to use this, because your mind, you're firing off a million cylinders. You're busy. You're always working.
Thank you.
You know, you're not necessarily someone you can point to and say like, you know, look at some of the side effects of cannabis. You know, but I did want to ask you, like, you know, some people sort of say, you know, it's kind of dulls you. It sort of, you know, calms you. You maybe, you know, people who are super high performing, maybe they're not as performing. Maybe they get apathetic. You know, these are some of the things, you know, some of the concerns people raise over, you know, maybe if you start pot really young, you know, maybe you lose your ambition to go to school, go to college. You never fulfill your potential. You know, these are things that people talk about, you know, and that's a different experience if you're like a young kid who's using a lot of cannabis versus, you know, a 42-year-old who's got their career and they're just doing it to do it, you know, to sort of chill out and relax or whatever for the reasons you identify. But you ever think about that? Like, you ever think about, like, can there be an abuse of cannabis of certain personalities or certain types where, you know, maybe they, you know, I just put it bluntly,
yeah,
you know, do some people fry their brain if they overuse it and they never reach sort of their full potential? Or can you comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's good. Good question. I think the answer is absolutely yes, right? You can abuse anything, right? Like there is nothing that taken to an extreme. Exercise overdone is not healthy, right? Like, I mean, you can die of drinking too much water.
Yeah.
That said, I've got 2 young kids, so I think about it very often. Right? I've got an 11-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter. I think about cannabis. I think about alcohol. I think about, you know, sexual violence, drunk driving, like all those things, right? So, you know, nothing, I would never encourage cannabis or alcohol, et cetera, for the young brain, right? Now, that is a very different thing than thinking that grown adults and independent members of society should not be able to decide what they put in their body, right? I mean, my view is the government's job is to protect our freedom and pursuit of happiness. And if you're not free to put what you want in your body, then I don't know that you're free, right? Like I firmly believe that you should hold adults accountable for their actions, not for what they put in their body. If they put things in their body that don't affect other people, they should have that right. Now, kids, minors, under our care, teaching, et cetera, developing brains, very different story. Part of the reason I like regulated cannabis is drug dealers don't check ID, right? Like this moves this from the drug dealer's pocket to a licensed legal place. There was actually just an article that came out. They sent around kind of secret shoppers. Not a single one of them who was underage was able to get in dispensary. Right. I mean, I'm sure you would not find that in liquor stores or bars, right? Like they went 0% of them made it in, right? We check not only ID, but we actually scan IDs. And that means it has to be valid because we track not just age, but daily purchase limits. There's rules on how much cannabis you can purchase. So if you came in, Josh, and you hit your limit in the morning and tried to come back at 5 o'clock before we closed, the computer would flag it. We wouldn't be able to sell anything to you. So not only do we know age, but we know the individual and we can track it. So, I like, again, I'm thinking about this as a parent with kids. I like the fact that cannabis is not in the same pocket as the guy selling hard drugs, right? Yeah. If cannabis moves, if cannabis was ever a gateway drug, I don't think it was, but if it ever was, quite likely the reason was our regulations and prohibitions put cannabis next to other drugs, right? So if you take it away from there and if you put it in a dispensary, we don't sell other drugs at the dispensary. We check IDs. Drug dealers do sell other drugs and they don't check IDs, right? So I think there's huge upside. You shouldn't pretend that something that does exist doesn't exist. It leaves you in a lot poorer position to control it than acknowledging that it's there and regulating it and making it safe and testing it and checking IDs and making sure that it has consistent dosing on it. Like all these things that only happen in licensed legal cannabis operations.
You ever get frustrated? Like I just asked you that question and, you had to explain it. Like if you were a tech guy still, right? If you were still doing that world, you'd be sort of on a pedestal, look at your amazing success. Now, every time you have to explain your success, you also have to sort of tamp down all of those concerns.
Justify it. Yeah.
Does that ever weigh on you? Like you're like, oh my goodness, people are judging me and my business and my soul because I'm in this industry, or not really?
It does. So early on, I decided that it was part of what I was embarking on was to help educate people, right? So I always actually thought, and I've lived this before, it was a business for me, which is if the doctors and lawyers and CEOs pretend that they don't use cannabis, and the only guy who's open about it is the guy who's panhandling in front of 7-Eleven, society's natural and logical response to that is to think that cannabis turns you into someone begging for change, right? So to me, you need to be, if you're doing things that you think you need to hide, you probably should think about it why you should be doing them. So I always took the approach, just like you could open the door to my fridge and find a couple beers in there, you could open a drawer and find cannabis. I don't pretend like one's an idol. I mean, we set up altars to alcohol. A bar is an altar to alcohol. Yet then take cannabis, which A, doesn't kill people, B, is healthier. It's a natural, unrefined plant. And then we hide it in the back of our sock drawer. So, I from the early on decided that I was not going to perpetuate that stigma by living as if it was true. It doesn't frustrate me at all to educate and share the knowledge I have. The only thing that I find frustrating, and it was a surprise to me, is I always assumed that people who had a negative connotation of cannabis had it because they were given inaccurate information, right? Schedule 1, no medical benefit, high potential for abuse, good people don't use it. I mean, even the stigmas like the lazy stoner stigma you touched on, recent research, and encourage people to go Google this. People who use cannabis exercise more, not less. Right? So it's like at one after another, the stigma that associated with cannabis was propaganda, not data, right? So always go to the data. So the thing that does frustrate me is the people who are opposed to cannabis, who I assume just didn't have good information and presented with actual data, would change their mind, don't. That's the frustrating part. It's the people who are not open to changing their opinion when they have new facts, right? To me, a mark of intelligence is not sticking to your guns, but changing your mind when you get new information, right? Like that's the whole point of life, is to kind of learn things and then course correct based on that. So the only thing frustrating to me is the people who are intentionally have their head stuck in the sand, only want to hear facts that reinforce their worldview and don't actually want to get smarter. They just want to be right at the expense of being correct.
Yeah, I mean, there's a generation that looks at like the 1970s, like portrayal of marijuana. You know, we've changed the name. We don't call it marijuana anymore. We call it cannabis.
Reefer madness.
Yeah, you know, Cheech and Chong movies. You know, there's a layer of racism too associated with the
Not
drug.
just over here. I mean, it's the whole thing. But,
Yeah.
I mean, let's be specific. This was never a war on drugs. It was a war on people, and specific people at that, right?
Yeah.
People with dark skin is who this was for. You can find the quotes and look them up, and Harry Anslinger and Nixon's head guy. Like, I mean, they literally say in these words, which we couldn't make being black or a hippie illegal. So we criminalized heroin and cannabis so we could disrupt those parts of society. Like, it worked. The war on drugs doesn't work. The war on people works. So look at the success and look at for the intention. And we've got more people in jail in this country than any other country. The majority of them are non-violent drug offenses. So, and the majority of them are people of color. So if you want to see what this was really a war on, look no further than the results and what we keep doing and what we need to stop doing. So yeah, sorry to interrupt, but that's the whole.
No, I mean, you went right there. So, you know, that's sort of what I was going to get into. And, you know, sadly, I think a lot of people still, that's what they're not saying it, but that's what they're protesting.
Racial undertones and stigmas against cannabis in particular, but drugs in general are very thinly veiled.
Yeah. Can we talk about you as the serial entrepreneur? You know, and you grew up in Goleta, Santa Barbara, local kid. You know, just you're inspirational in terms of like just being able to start businesses and continue and evolve and sort of create things and a market for things that people want. Can you talk about you and, you know, where that came from? And, you know, how do you go from being software.com to Sonos and then you're doing something else? A lot of people, they never take the risk for a variety of reasons. And sometimes they'll take it, they'll fail and they give up, or sometimes they'll, you know, they make it and they're done. You just keep going and going. Can you talk like sort of like the business of Graham Farrar and what's in your head?
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, as you mentioned, Santa Barbara's my hometown. I went to Foothill Elementary School, and then I actually was lucky enough to go to Santa Barbara Middle School, which is an awesome private school here in town, and then went back to Santa Barbara High, another public school again. And then I would have gone to UCSB probably if I didn't already live here. But I thought, you know, I had to go somewhere else. So I ended up going to CU Boulder for a little bit. I studied molecular biology and biochemistry. Through it all, I've always been a, you know, tech geek, nerd, you know, whatever term you want to use, right? I like computers and technology a lot. Was there, you know, early on as an intern at Wavefront Technology, if people remember that, some of the first 3D animation software in the world. From that, friends there, I actually came back from college looking for a summer job, and that's how I ended up at software.com back when it was 20 people or so. John McFarlane is a serious mentor of mine and good friend, was the CEO of software.com and Sonos. I learned a lot from him. I worked at software.com for 5 years. We were lucky enough to go public right in the middle of the .com boom. We we're the digital post office is what software.com did, for those who don't know. Basically, we made the servers that held your email right about the time when people outside of universities realized that an email address is something that they wanted. So think about, you know, the first time people were dialing onto the internet with modems and things like that. We went public. I bought a sailboat. I took my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife and the mother of our kids, on a boat, and we sailed for 2 years in New Zealand. Came back to get married, and basically I didn't want to pick out centerpieces and other wedding stuff, so I called John McFarlane up, who was the CEO of Software.com, and asked him what he was up to, and he said he was just sitting down with 5 other guys to come up with a music idea. I'm a big music fan. I've been on the board of directors of Santa Barbara Bowl for 13 years and ran the education outreach committee there, helping, you know, fund performing arts stuff for kids for 10 years. And so he said, basically, come over, like, we've got an idea, we're working on something. That idea became Sonos. So I was really fortunate to be, you know, kind of, you know, the first 3 years of Sonos, and 15 years later, it's still the best product in the category. And then I started a company called iStorytime, which made apps for kids right when the iPhone came out. And then, through this, I'd always been a huge cannabis fan, right? So hobbyist stuff, garages and things like that. I just found it, healthy and positive, and I love the idea of a plant. And I kind of look at plants even as technology a little bit. They're kind of like a computer that you have to figure out how the instruction code works, and then you give it consistent inputs and they give you pretty consistent outputs. And then got into cannabis, and always thought, I'm a believer. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice, is a Martin Luther King Jr. quote. So I always figured that the truth would come, and that the idea that cannabis was a negative would go away, and California would be a leader in that. So over time, as that started to happen, we saw Prop 64 coming, but kind of like 2015, I dove into the cannabis side of things. And your question is a good one, right? So I think that the thread, there's a couple of threads. One is I've got a lot of experience doing things that people have no experience doing, right? So if you think about software.com, that was the internet before anyone knew what the internet looked like or was going to become, right? Sonos was digital music in a world before people, like MP3s had just started, right? Like there was no Spotify, there was no Apple Music, there was no any other music streaming platform. Zero of them existed. Nobody had one, right? Like we had to convince people to digitize their CDs to even be able to play music on their Sonos. So again, something very early. iStorytime, so the apps for kids, apps were brand new, right? So the thread there is just the experience and willingness to step into kind of an undefined world and build something. The other is, agriculture is a big component that's technology, particularly well done large scale agriculture. I like to call it precision agriculture. But if you start to think of cannabis, it's new, right? So the experience doing things people have no experience doing, building an industry, the rules are being written, as in real time. But also think that the combination of my passion, technology by background, cannabis by passion, you start to put those things together and it's really a perfect fit. The fact that I get to do it in my hometown backyard is like, pinch me kind of awesome, right? But if you think about cannabis, any business has one biological system. It's the people in it, right? Like you always have the people. Cannabis happens to have two biological systems. You have the people and you have the plant. But if you think about it from a systems point of view, right? A cannabis plant is almost like a computer program. If you know what you want out of it and you can figure out what inputs to give it, and then do that consistently, and efficiently, you're going to get, they're not random, right? You give a plant the same environment, the same genetics, you're going to get the same results. So you start thinking about it from that kind of, precise, consistent, efficient, that's basically what a computer is made for, right? So we take computers, people, and plants and put them together in a way to get the highest quality consistently at the best cost, which most efficiently, so that we can deliver a product to a consumer that is an amazing product at a fantastic cost. And that's our thing, right? Is highest quality, lowest cost, best product. We have the number 2 brand in the state of California right now, so it's working. And the consumer says they like it, and that's what we're going to keep doing.
Great. And when you were growing up, like you're talking about Santa Barbara Middle School, like when you were a kid, were you one of these kids who was bouncing on off the walls with ideas constantly? I guess I'm just trying to tap into the fact that, I don't want to put you on a pedestal because I'm a journalist, but there's something about you that seems to really sort of glow. You're really excited about what you do, and you're committed and you're driven and you do it.
Yeah.
You don't see that with everybody. Maybe everybody's just their own time and place, they'll get there. But were you like that as a boy? Did you make a switch, when you're 20 years old? Or where did that enthusiasm come from?
Yeah, I definitely bounced around a lot, oftentimes to the chagrin of my teachers. So that was kind of that I probably fit the stereotype a little bit of the could do well but didn't always do well in school, kind of thing. If something captured my interest, I was all over it, and if it didn't, it kind of got nothing. I've always, I guess, there's a Steve Jobs quote I like, which is that the rules of life are made by people no smarter than you. So I've always, kind of had that thinking that you didn't have to wait for somebody else to do it or set it up. You could be, you could go make a dent in the universe, so to speak. So I kind of always had that take of maybe not knowing what I shouldn't have been able to do and just going and trying to do it otherwise. And, I think fairly gritty and persistent. And, I think it's Thomas Edison, 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. So I think I probably have that part as well. But I do. I mean, I don't typically do. I mean, maybe I answered my own question there, right? I don't typically do things that I'm not excited about. If I'm not into it, it basically gets 0% of me. And if I am into it, then it gets 150% of me. And so the things that I spend my time doing, I think are awesome. I mean, in cannabis, right? Like we have this amazing opportunity, right? We can make society better. We can create an industry. We can make an awesome home for our employees. We can build a business which hopefully creates value for our shareholders, of which our employees, every single one of them has stock options. So our employees are investors too. And, we can do it in a way that's positive for the communities, right? Like the idea that you can build an industry business, make a spot for your employees, create value for your shareholders, and make the community better. Like usually you get to pick 2 of those, maybe 3 if you're really lucky, right? Like we're in this position where we can do them all. So in that case, you run, not walk.
Yeah. And what do you think is the future of this industry? Do you sort of see, the percentage of people who are the skeptics? Do you see them coming along? Is this going to be a fight continually for 10 years, 15 years? And when you sort of plan out how this industry is changing, what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, some people you're not going to change your mind, right? And the reality is that some views evolve with society. You can, this is not me saying it. You can go look at it. I'm a data guy, so I try not to say things that are my opinion that I can't point to why I have that opinion. You can go look at the data and the approval ratings, the ideas that cannabis should be legal. They're through the roof. And they're particularly through the roof when you carve off the older age demographics, right? So I don't think it will be longer than a 10 or 15 year fight, because when you look at the people who are 10 or 15 years younger than us, they're like, it's almost a de facto. They can't even believe that it's not legal, right? So the only people kind of shifting their opinions or on the edge are the older folks, and eventually we know what happens with older generations. They go away and they're replaced by younger generations. That's the world's supposed to work, and that's the way it does. So
it's more Steve Jobs there.
Yeah, right. I don't think we're going to keep fighting. I think that this thing is just getting started. It's like you could argue for it's either batting practice or the second inning, right? It's not. You see things moving really fast broadly. In the last 8 weeks, we had 4 states legalize recreational adult use cannabis, right? That's from 12 to 16. That's a 30% increase in 2 months, right? That means 48% of Americans now live in a 21 plus cannabis state, right? Like we're almost to the majority. Something like 46 states now have some either medical or adult use cannabis, right? So we're way past the tipping point. Again, Chuck Schumer's beating out 420 as a national holiday. All he's talking about is how he wants to reform the federal laws on cannabis. Kamala Harris as the lead sponsor of the MORE Act, which would completely deschedule cannabis, right? So like it's not illegal at all anymore. And she's now obviously the vice president, deciding vote in the Senate. The House of Representatives passed the Safe Banking Act for the 4th time. Now it'll go to the Senate and hopefully get a vote. The House of Representatives passed the MORE Act, but could never get a vote because Mitch McConnell wouldn't even allow people to vote on it. Like, what does that tell you when someone won't even allow it to be voted on, right? Now, Democratic-controlled Congress, MORE Act gets passed by the House. Vice President's the sponsor of it. It gets a vote. Does it pass the first time or not? I don't know. I mean, I will be surprised if we don't have federal legalization of cannabis in the next 12 months. Could it be 2 years? For sure, but I'll be surprised if it's not in the next 12. And that's going to be a watershed moment, right? So many things happen. The tax burdens go away, and U.S. listing on exchanges, and all the pent up, investment capital on the sidelines can access the space. I mean, everyone knows where this is going at this point, right? It's beyond obvious, and it's just going to like I said, maybe we're in the first inning now, second inning, maybe could still be batting practice. Hard to know, but we're 2 years before the end of Prohibition, and the end of Prohibition helped lift us out of the Great Depression as a country. I think the end of cannabis prohibition could help us recover from the economic drag that the pandemic has been. The number of jobs are amazing. The health benefits are amazing. The tax revenue is amazing. Not putting people in jail and spending money tearing families apart over a plant would be amazing. Letting people, who've had criminal convictions that hold them back in life, get those off their records so that they can make our society a better place would be amazing, right? So it's like there's just so much upside to come here. It's a lot of hard work. Every day's a Monday sometimes, and every week feels like a year, but tremendously honored and lucky to be sitting here and having the opportunity to work on all of it.
Yeah, just a couple more things, Graham,
Sure.
then we'll wrap up. There's been some local controversy about companies not from California getting licenses to run dispensaries in the city of Santa Barbara. I just wonder if you had a thought. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Should people care if a company gets a license from the city of Santa Barbara or the county or wherever, and then there's a transfer or an acquisition, and then another company from outside of the area comes in and basically holds the license and manages it? Are we giving up our local licenses to out-of-town corporations? What do you think? Is that an issue from your perspective?
I mean, I'm a local Santa Barbara guy, so there's certain a portion of me that likes Santa Barbara for Santa Barbara. And I think part of the reason Santa Barbara is nice is that it is a little bit insular, I guess might be the word, right? Like we're a local community and we like it that way. So there's certainly that part. There's also the part which is we do live in a free world and economy and whatever. We got I'm sure there's a Motel 6, so there's Starbucks, right? There's all kinds of things, and one of the things that I oftentimes do with cannabis, and this includes even for my life, is I swap other things up and check it, right? Like if someone was if we open a cannabis farm, there's an immense amount of oversight and 13 different regulatory agencies and tons of public hearings and all this kind of stuff, right? If someone wanted to open a rhubarb farm, would anybody talk about it? No, right? So what is the difference, right? And it's the cannabis, a lot of times it's the cannabis stigma and all the things that we do on that, right? So, you might ask the same question and substitute something else. If someone wanted to buy a liquor store, right? I mean, a liquor store is a licensed entity. That's a license, and you've got to go through a background check to get it. So should someone be able to buy it? Yes. Should someone from San Francisco be able to buy it? Probably yes. Should someone from Texas be able to buy it? Probably yes too. Assuming that they go through the process that says you're a good person to have this and you make sense and we pick you, right? So, I think your question is obviously about the upper state dispensary, and I don't have any firsthand knowledge of it. There was a heavy vetting, and they picked the people, right? And so, in so much as the people changed, as long as the new people were appropriately vetted, then I think that's the evolution, right? We're not going to have areas of businesses that like only a Santa Barbara resident can own forever, or at least I don't think we should. But that said, a lot of filtering went through, and so anybody who comes in, any change should probably be filtered similarly, because we have a standard that we're trying to keep up with. So I've got nothing bad to say about anybody involved in that, and I don't think there's any impropriety or whatever that I'm aware of. But I think it's fair that new owners go through similar vetting as original owners.
Yeah. Okay. And last thing, you mentioned, you have 2 kids. We're probably about the same age. I'm always like to talk to dads about, how do you juggle what you do with being a dad? So I'm just wondering if you could just talk a little bit about, what is your life like? Are you how do you balance like being a dad and being high profile and being involved in this industry that's really controversial and growing, and how do you do all that? Can you talk to me a little bit about how you
I mean, that's I think the ultimate struggle of life is actually balance. If you want it, it's not that hard to do any one thing really well, right? Like if your only job was to be a parent, like okay. If your only job was to go run a business, also okay, right? If your only job is to be a soccer player and that's literally all you did, like you could probably be a pretty good one. The challenge is, play on your soccer team, run a business, and be a good parent, right? All at the same time. So I think that's the ultimate question of life. My wife is awesome and does a really good job holding down the home front. This is a crazy, hectic time for me. I could work 40 hours a day and 10 days a week and still not be done. So you got to prioritize, and for me, I need to not require very much sleep and very much like there's no real sitting around. I like meditating, and it's, getting 10 minutes to sit down is actually, it's amazingly hard right now. There's always something that needs to be done. There's not enough hours in the day. I close the computer, not when I finished, but when like I need to go to bed, or else I won't have enough hours of sleep to wake up and be on my game the next day. I try and simplify a lot, like, and get rid of the things that are not key and core to me, right? Like, so, I don't spend very much time shopping for new clothes, right? Like, that's not the high priority thing. So what is really important, focus on that. There's never enough time to do it all, at least for me right now. So, kids, business, growth, our employees, making sure that we're doing the things that are beneficial for everybody, and all that is, everybody gets 24 hours a day, and so you just want to spend them as valuably and meaningfully as you can, and I think that's what life's all about.
All right, well, thank you, Graham Farrar. After that, I feel really honored that you took time here to talk to me and talk a little bit about your industry and the success of your companies and your personal story. So I really appreciate it. Good luck to you, and we'll follow this as it comes along. So thanks a lot for your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Josh. I appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.